There they are. Hey, Bradley. Oh, you've got your new Houston banner in the background. Hmm. Wait for Christopher to come on. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Bradley's looking puzzled, so I was.
Was making my audio work.
It works now. I was just commenting on Houston banner in the background. Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Christopher.
Good to see
Great.
you all.
And how are you, Sarah?
Well, David, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm a little under the weather today. I just got back from New York City this morning, so my long COVID came back, is back some. Um, yeah, and so anyways, just being in New York, where it's like this melting pot beyond all melting pots, and yeah, but I was there for a technology and coaching conference, and that was good.
Are you back in Europe now?
I am. I'm back in Amsterdam. Yeah.
Mm.
And Martin, how are you?
Not bad, thank you. We got back from the UK just a couple of days, 4 or 5 days ago.
Okay.
But it's been a slightly difficult transition.
Hmm. Hmm. And how's life for you in Houston, Bradley?
It's hot always this
Yeah.
summer, but overall it's good. It's just I think the job is really like cool, but like it takes a long time to rebuild social relationships after being somewhere
Hmm.
for 15 years. So I'm still in the midst of that.
Hmm. When you described it before, it sounded like a fascinating portfolio of things that give you freedom to go do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like, I don't know what academics is ideally, in that it's a
Hmm.
couple classes, it's do research on whatever you want, it's a day a week and summers to coach or get grants. I might have a chance to work with the person in charge of the trial bureau that does felonies because she's trying to fix the culture. And so
Huh.
it's just stuff like that. It's just sort of there's things to do and then there's space to do it. So I'm pretty blessed, I think, in that way. And so
Good. Yeah. So I do have some slides, but I always prefer to start in a more informal way and just to see what questions or thoughts you're bringing to the call in terms of your curiosity about the design studio.
So I'll start by saying I have no idea
Excellent.
what this can contribute.
Okay. Okay. And do you have anything you wish it would contribute?
um, I'm currently evaluating what to do next.
Hmm.
And so I'm actually looking at a fairly broad range of options.
Hmm. Okay.
It
Hmm.
might include doing the retreat again,
Okay.
but it might include something different.
Okay. Hmm. And I know, Sarah, you were working on some things when we last talked. So, like, what's present for you right now about this?
I'm always curious, so I'm always a certain skip of delight when I get my latest update from one of you. Um, so there's a general curiosity. I missed out on the first retreat. We had some
Hmm.
family issues, illness in the family that I was conscious would possibly mean I couldn't be as present as I'd like to be, and I felt a responsibility really to not only myself but whoever I was put in a break, like a group with, that I couldn't kind of bring all of myself to that. So I stepped back and now feeling kind of more able to
Okay.
kind of turn a bit into me really.
Hmm.
So this and it's felt. I mean, I obviously looking forward to hearing more about it, but um, it had a kind of applied flavor to it, maybe
Mhm.
how we bring all we've learned from wherever it be, whether it be this space or other spaces, and how we can, that manifests as our kind of own version of how we want to show up, really, whether it be coaching or whatever. So that, I think, I'm just curious about that, really.
Mm.
Kind of feel ready to take something new on. So
Yeah,
thing for me.
yeah, good. It was really interesting. I've done 3 conferences in the last 3 weeks in 3 different places, and the first 2 I was on a panel about AI and coaching, and the last one I was just a visitor. I get to just enjoy. But there were one of the themes, particularly in the latter one, because it's very focused on this, that speaks to that, Sarah, is so much of what we once thought coaching was is will easily be done by AI. It already is. I mean, it's astounding where it's moved already. I mean, you saw all these people like on the leading edge of thinking and product and but it's really and then coach education is going to have to change because coach education historically is more about learning stuff, theories and models and methods and tools and and again the AI will be better at much of that than we are. And so one of the things that sort of came out of this journey for me was recognizing, which I've always known, but is now even more obvious to me, that there's a universal pattern in everything I've ever done for 35 years. And each product is really just an orientation around how to use that philosophy in different ways. So the retreat is really an inner journey into that same space. And the 5 maturities really came along in a very handy time to provide a structure and a language for all that. And the design studio is a sort of a movement through the pattern, but more external facing. And one of its core questions, again, was not so much what do I need to do differently, but more how do I engage the people I'm working with to think in a new way? Um, with that comes the ability to then sell work more effectively. But we're for us to work this way requires many clients to think about what they're trying to do very differently. And I could see that even I met with through friends at the conference. Many of them had brought junior members of their L&D teams to the conference. And watching them describe what they're thinking about doing with AI and change and stuff, you could just see that they're coming from a very old orientation, which doesn't fit with AI at all. Um, and so I tried to bring the AI and the ID and the 5 maturities together to show there's another way to do this. And so I see this design studio as figuring out what that looks like, that interchange between these 3 dimensions, and what that would specifically look like for each of you, so that you would have something at the end that you could use to do what's important to you at this juncture in your work. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Christopher?
Yeah, so sorry, I just like to pick up on what you said, the application aspect that you noticed. So one of the things that we thought would be quite helpful, helping people to better take themselves onto the journey as well as the work and the client, is that they start working on, that they bring something, a question or a project or something that's really important for them. Can also be very personal, into the space and begin working with it right on from the start, so that you would work with it as we go through the program and apply whatever it is that you're learning and reflecting on in your pods, and see how that's changing your approach, the relationship with the work itself, as well as with your counterparts. So obviously we begin by situating ourselves and then the story. So that might be, how are you approaching your work now? What is that you're noticing about that? And then you go on search and try to explore and identify new ways of seeing and engaging. And so by the end of the journey, we hope that you'll be able to see, have a good sense of the journey that you've taken from where you started off and then where you've ended up, so that you have hopefully more clarity as to what's waiting for you next. So
Yeah.
that's how we build that practicality aspect more into the program. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would also, if I just may add this, ask of you to take a much more active stance in the program. So in the past, I know this for myself, when I did the ID program some years back, I was just kind of grappling with the materials that I took, it took me a lot of time to just let it sink in and listen to the recordings. And I didn't have that kind of transitional object to work with to keep me engaged. And so we want to make this quite explicit, that we would ask people to really come with something and then grapple with it in real time together with this enabling community, where we invite others to participate and join and provide feedback, so that that the space itself becomes a teacher as well.
Mm. So I can show you some slides of what this might look like, but I want to see if any of this has brought up anything already. Hmm.
I'm drawn to the sort of generative quality
Hmm.
of the concept. I think my questions are probably about to be answered by the slide. I'd be interested to know the kind of interplay between the group, the full group, your respective involvements, and then the pods, because from previous experience, it's a little bit of luck of the draw, because you
Yeah.
end up in a pod where you just immediately, there's a spark and you just really get on really well. I mean, I'm still in contact with some of the people I first met on narrative coaching, and then you can land in others, and it's just
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
going to fly for no one, nothing. It just is what it is. So that feels like that could be quite important, and whether you're going to try and match through shared interests, or so I guess that would be an extension to what you might be about to tell us. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, have found recently that by organizing the retreats more by time zone, then at least people have an easier time scheduling. We will make it have spaces in the forum and beyond and circle for this program where people can post, "Hey, I'm working on this. Is anybody else working on this too?" So you can connect with people either in the same industry or the same sort of desire. But it's really interesting too, because in a traditional program, and we've all had this experience. You look around the first day of class and you go, "Oh, there's nobody here," where it just doesn't match you. They're on a different journey than you are. But the reality isn't part of why we want to emphasize that this is less of, well, no, it's as much about figuring out how to engage clients to think a new way than it is about mastering this right away ourselves. So when you're in organizations or groups or whatever you want, the medium you're working in, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of people that you would never choose to work with. It's part of the learning, it's part of the journey. It also might mean that you might say, huh, I feel uncomfortable speaking to that, or I feel uncomfortable even raising the issue at all. And which again will be a wonderful laboratory for you to say, huh, if I'm going to implement this thing I'm working on, I'm probably going to have to be more bold in how I talk to people and more declarative and more outspoken, more a pain in the ass. And so we want people to be able to use the experience they're having as the curriculum, even more so than in the normal programs. And then, just like you would in a project, who else can you enroll in your dream or your vision or your project that might be a useful ally to you or a useful foil for you? Um, yeah. So that people, to Christopher's point, that we all take a more agentic view of participation. We're not pacing this by what David's saying. We're pacing this by where am I in my project and what do I need next? Yeah. Christopher.
Yeah, just to build on this, in my view, the forum has somewhat not really lived up to its potential, I think. And so what we are trying to do is to make better use of the forum by providing more spaces for you to interact. And so even though the potential is somewhat limited because we have the circle space with these kind of chat forum-like
Yeah.
style, we were thinking of supporting people to showcase their work per each cycle, and and to do that in a kind of a semi-structured fashion. So we're thinking of developing and giving you some prompts how you might showcase the work in the current state that it's in. So with the first cycle, it's kind of how are you seeing, what are you noticing, and structure it perhaps as you like, as much as you like, along these prompts, or do it the way it serves you best. So then you would have that kind of space as well, so that we free you from the wrong notion that you can only talk with your peers in the pod. I've actually had great conversations when I did additional conversations with other members,
Yeah.
because there's no reason to not do it, right? This is just one container, but the
Yeah.
container itself is the entire group. And so
Mm.
per each cycle, you would be given different prompts along which you then can engage and bring the work and see what happens as some kind of experiment. What happens if I promote it, present it this way, and what kind of response am I getting?
Yeah.
But as to David's point, this requires a more agentic community. So this is going to be something that we would like to see from the participants, so
Yeah.
that it works, because we haven't done it yet that way. Yeah.
Mm. Um, Let me just give you, put up this slide. They're just really only, some of these we won't need because you've all done ID, but um, let me just share this. There you go. Yeah. So I'm just going to go down here. Yeah, I was going to let you read this because this sort of summarizes for me a lot of what we just said. Um, and yeah.
I think your point, David, as to what to work with, whatever part that I'm having, is a great invitation to practice improvisation, because we cannot
Yes.
choose
Yeah.
who we are meeting and with our clients. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Then, yeah, and it's one of the lessons I think we learned. So we used to run this program at the end of narrative coaching back in the day. It was kind of a bonus series when I did this through WBEX, where I turned the narrative coaching model into a sales tool in terms of how to pace people to understand why buying a narrative coach or buying a program based on narrative coaching would be useful. And so we're weaving that into here. So you'll have some ways of thinking about how would you sell this to a client? How would you bring your project forward in some new ways? And then work with the actual project that you're working on to be able to explore that. But again, we're just want to really keep focusing that we're not, yes, you will learn the model and you can practice the model, etc. But it's more about your ability to engage the client to think this way, not just yourself. So you're not doing the model to your client. You're engaging the client into the possibilities that this work makes available to them that they wouldn't otherwise have. Um, And so there's really practical applications of this. So there's a project that I'm on the cusp of bidding for through a series of conversations. The boss is very supportive of the ideas we've surfaced, but also has a much lower threshold for risk. Whereas the person I know really well that wants to bring me in and has a great relationship with her boss. So she will act sort of as an intermediary between the two of us and translate wherever needed to get the boss to sign off. And so it's in the past, I think I would have efforted more trying to convince the boss to do this, but now I think there's a different relationship between the pieces of the puzzle here that actually is going to be more effective. Um, and then helping to find language that allows the boss to recognize herself in this, even though it feels like a bit of a stretch, but she can. And so there was actually a metaphor from her own life and her own origins of her career that we actually used in that conversation to help her realize how she could use that metaphor to help her think about working this way. So, yeah.
And speaking of language, so with the caveat that Dave and I are still debating as to how we would do this, perhaps here and there introducing a different a methodology or a different language might help you expand your vocabulary so that you can meet the clients in their own language and their own understanding more easily without compromising on some of the ID core principles. Because
Yeah.
sometimes translation is difficult, and you might notice anxiety showing up within a client when they don't have a sense of safety, because you might not be giving them goals or specific learning outcomes, for example. So how can you approach that differently, perhaps through a different way of looking at it that gives them some peace of mind?
Yeah. 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 And it's a great example too of why I think this is going to be really different than in the past. So Christopher and I have really different opinions about all this, and there's space for both of them in the program. And so we're not going to include it as it's built into the program because that doesn't work for me. But having it available, again, there's going to be people in the experience that say, I'm dealing with highly structured clients. It's a bridge too far to get them here. But if I gave them some words they'd recognize and may already use and find out what of this they already have available in their corporate vocabulary, then we build, it's a much easier bridge to build. Oh, I know that. Well, it's like that. Okay. Um, and so we're thinking of these as, which is the whole notion of kind of this paint palette. So some of the colors, there's some of the colors that Christopher would use, I wouldn't as much, and vice versa. And that's fine because there's not a singular palette of colors or a universal pattern of colors that is ID. And there was a vendor at the conference that spoke in New York. I don't really like styles inventories, but his was actually quite clever, not because of the wording, but because of this whole thing around oftentimes coaches or leaders trying to coach from their own preferences. So you can use this little inventory they created to identify kind of how you tend to get stuff done. But then more importantly, you can ask the person you're going to be coaching, what do they tend to use or appreciate? So that you are working with them in a way, like, for example, how to move to complete something in a way that, so one client might need a lot of rallying and enthusiasm and support. Another one might need tips or structures. So then there's kind of a match. But for me, one of the things I think that's unique about ID is that when we have styles, it sort of takes out context. And it presumes that you can know going in what the client's going to need. And even if they're not very good at something and they see that, yeah, that's the pattern I tend to rely on. I like having steps, but they might be facing something that doesn't have steps. So to kind of coach towards their traditional patterns, probably not going to be helpful. But again, if we're just really focusing on how do we get our clients to meet us in this new space for themselves, how do we get ourselves to show up in that space, then it gives us much more freedom to figure out what do we want to use to help make the most of this. Yeah. Um, yeah, so these are the pieces. I think I have it all right there, but one of the things we found really helpful in the Guiding Lights retreat, which we're doing again starting next week, is for them it's the last stop one is a handbook and a journal. But because this is a design studio, we're thinking more in the language of Sketchpad. So as you go and clarity is emerging, or you're trying some things, you want to take notes, we're going to encourage you to think as a painter, not a journalist or a documenter. If that works for you, fine. But it's more like, oh, I'm getting this idea, I'm getting this sense, or oh, I can see how these two dots now connect. And so it's in the handbook now. So you can journal in the same space as the content, and sort of have a running sort of commentary on the journey that you're on. Um, and I'm hoping, we don't know yet, but Circle sent out an announcement a couple of days ago that they say launching their biggest new feature ever next week. And so I'm hoping that it's going to be a much more robust process by which people can interact in the system. That's my prayer. It would make the most sense. It would be the most helpful, so that this is a much more, the forum's more dynamic and more cumulative, so that you start building up things. So, but we'll see. Whatever they end up doing, we'll see to what degree we can integrate that here. Any questions or thoughts about these building blocks? Okay. So let me just put all these up. So I'll just put all these up. Oops, sorry, one too many. So we, again, one of the sort of meta pattern for all of the programs now, we're all linking them all back to the 5 maturities. And because again, we want to help you develop your clients to go on a journey with you. So for example, you just take the first one. When we at the retreat, we use the same structure, but we focus it only on yourself. For this one, it might be if a client comes in and is already kind of lasered in, I know exactly what we're going to do, and here's all the forms we need, and here's all the usual structures, they're not going to be able to hold space if you point out there's more complexity here than they might realize, or that's actually probably not going to get them what they think they want. And so for them to be able to see and to hold the space for what they're trying to create in a deeper way, we want them to, as we move through the design tutor together, to keep developing their own abilities to think and do the work this way. And what we find is, and this is where the ID influence comes in, is that they're reinventing themselves, but they're also reinventing their environment as they move through all of this. And to Christopher's point, there will be some other resources, but if you discover like, oh, number 3, we actually have these skills which are outdated now, so we have to get people to stop doing certain things and learn new skills. And and so you might say from the environment's perspective, that and from that sort of basic competency, we need to kind of think a bit about what we're asking people to do now and how we might show up to that and do that same for ourselves. Um, and yeah, and then if Martin would recognize and Christopher would recognize this, but we have sort of 2 main processes. So this is the essence of the model we use in the center there in our retreat. Because again, a lot of this is it's nowhere near as deep as the retreat, and we leave out the 5 gates, but it's the same piece about how do we language how we want to develop ourselves, and how do we language what the client might need for us to go on this journey with us. And and in this domain, more so than often for the retreat, the 5 elements of I-beam become much more significant as sort of placeholders for that journey with the client. And then we'll introduce another core piece from the ID program around the zones of the developmental threshold zones, and we'll give you lots of practices about that. So you might have in your offer for your client a desire for them to learn something new. You actually can workshop that and try it out with your pod, or try it out on the forum and kind of get some feedback on it and see how it goes and look at how you might want to tweak that. But we're doing this in a kind of a cycle, so that we can sort of see the movement around the circle for ourselves, for the project, for our clients, and kind of what might be asked of us as we move through that process. Um, so I'm just going to stop there. That was a lot, but and just see if you have any questions about this part. Anything come up?
So what I could, Sarah, you
Yeah,
unmuted
it's just a
yourself.
reflection, really, just that it will be. I'm taken with the fact it could be. How to explain this? What am I thinking? There's something intriguing about
There we go.
having other people kind of exploring our approaches. Like, you know, it could be in its own right, like it creates an interruption, doesn't it, in your own thinking when other people have
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
so that feels like energetic, like that could be a really might not feel that helpful in the moment, but I could see that could be helpful in a way. It's kind of the, you know, in taking Vygotsky from that perspective,
Yeah.
that it's kind of creating scaffolding for ourselves. Yeah, so
Yeah. One of my favorite students who I've known for probably a decade used to bug me to no end. She always had a need for massive amounts of details. And that was her comfort. That was her security blanket. And I don't have that need. So I would find ways to create them for her and people like her. But to your point, Sarah, I think this will be fabulous. So if you're realizing you've got preferences in yourself that might impede your ability to work with a specific client that you really are attracted to, who's like, so imagine that you got some coaching gigs with an engineering firm, right? So then people like my friend would be a godsend to have in a pod. If I did it, if I talked about it this way, would that be enough for you? Of course, you'll say no because it's never enough. But then you can decide how long down that path you want to go. But then they're going to see things and know things that you can't because you don't think that way. You don't need that. Um, and so Christopher's done a really great job sort of advocating for this, of showcasing where we're at that week. And you think, and it's hard because, and we've all had this from like often from projects we didn't win. It seems so obvious to us, but the client somehow didn't grasp the beauty and the brilliance of what we were proposing because there were certain elements they would have needed to be convinced. And so this is a way for us to all be more successful by saying, hey, I'm going to try this now, especially with these two people because they bother me because they're not like me. And as a way to test it out before you go to market.
And it's safe because
Yeah.
it's fairly inconsequential. We are wanting to create, soft boundaries around how we treat each other, with all the privacy and sense of safety involved for people to really open up. And as you said, we want to really give back the work to us. I know for myself how often I think, it's the client or it's the circumstance that has nothing to do with me, except that the way how I related to that situation that made the difference. And so and giving ourselves permission to go to that experience and revisit and note and begin to notice again, spiraling through this experience, we might discover something that otherwise we wouldn't, and hopefully we get the support from the other members
Yeah.
to hear or to see something else that we wouldn't otherwise open ourselves up to if we were in a real client scenario, because the
Yeah.
stakes are very, very different. And there
Yeah.
are repercussions. Perhaps we want to nourish and protect the relationship that we have with the client. So we rarely have these spaces. Maybe we
Yeah.
talk about it with our spouse or partner, but then again, that's very, very different. So we try to have this as a kind of a third space for us.
Yeah. And to that end, more so than any other program we've ever had, We try to really build in even more learning theory. So we've got sort of adaptation of Kolb and some things from myself, and the last dot point for each of the 5 maturity sections. Again, is some languaging and framing around what might be offered to the client to help them move through this, and what might keep them, what might be challenging for them. And so, like one, to go even just to the first phase, in most of the ID projects I've done over the last 20 years, 15 years, 20 years, um, the fundamental breaking through point for them was in Situate when we asked them to go out and observe key experiences that happen in the organization around the thing they're trying to change. We're not doing it to evaluate it, to judge it, to try to change it. It's eye-opening for people when they actually watch other people doing what they also do and realizing that it's not nearly as wonderful as they think it is. And so we're trying to just help pace the journey that the client's on, bring them along with us, and create opportunities for them to have a safe and generative space to try out what they need to try out in order to kind of move towards what they most want. Yeah. Let's see what else is here. Yeah, this is just our version of which I'm going to retreat as well, but it's much more about we won't be focusing on the gates very much. It's all more directly related to the change process that all learning development requires. Um, and again, it's both in terms of you kind of framing each of these phases for yourself, like what am I asking the client? What are they going to need next here? But it's also a language that you can then use the client. So if you interrupt their pattern in the beginning, you invite them to look at what their service delivery model, for example, in a profoundly new way. Well, what if you looked at it like this? What if you're willing to let go of the fact that that may have worked a long time ago, but doesn't work now? So what if? How could you manage the stress that might create or the anxiety? How can you expand your awareness and see more? How can you mature yourselves to work maybe in a new way? And so we're kind of doing that inner outer dance, sort of like the retreat, but this is much more about the outer application of this work. And then whatever inner work that you or the clients would need to do to make it happen. Yeah.
And in terms of pacing, it's really entirely up to you where you decide you want or need to pay attention to the most. You are not going to be rushed or raced through the model to arrive at a final product, because it's not the project itself. You center your learning around whatever it is that you begin to notice more deeply and decide to stay with it. And then you might think, oh, I'm taking much longer than I had thought for this part, but then you might be able to make actually a leap
Yeah.
into something very different that otherwise you might not have,
Yeah.
because you give yourself permission to really pay attention, which I think is another luxury.
Yeah. And it borrows from one of our themes in narrative coaching, which is we really focus a lot on what the client is ready for. The rest is kind of moot. And we're now doing this at a systemic level. And so if you have, for example, a client that is very honestly keen to learn from you how to get better at something like giving feedback or making strategies or whatever you're working on, um, and you start to build something with them that enriches that. But if you when you stand back, say through spiritual maturity, you realize that they always make these beautiful documents, but then no, they don't actually implement them. So to Christopher's point, they will try to seduce you to hang out in the let's beautiful documents phase. Let's articulate perfectly the learning outcomes in advance, which is a utter waste of time to me. Um, and to say, well, what if we just went into this in a very different way? And so this provides a really a wonderful opportunity for the clients to stretch themselves, and for you, as Christopher noted, to spend the time where they need it most from you to kind of move forward.
I'm so curious how it is all landing for you, Martin or Bradley, if at all. Does that bring up some questions or insights, perhaps, or comments?
Go ahead, Martin. Go ahead, Martin.
I mean, my situation is that I feel that I'm what the military call a target depleted area. And I love the methodology. It goes back to the stuff that I did with University of Warwick many years ago, but I have nowhere immediately to apply it. And that's the problem. I love the idea.
Oh. We can talk about that if you want, but perhaps Bradley.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty specific project, I think, or an idea of what I've been wanting to do. And so part of it is just, committing to something like this would force me to do it. And also just to be in a space that I'm not in charge of, which I desperately try to find, given my current roles. Like, I don't want to be the teacher, instructor, advisor, mentor all the time. And so I think, this, revisiting sort of the process and the approach, I think is helpful. And I guess broadly speaking, I have this, I'm trying to create a version of what would be like a narrative life story of people's like leadership growth journey. And so, I'm talking about like an interview that might take 2 or 3 hours that you then have, but can also like mine for information. So I really want people to broadly find a way to sit and reflect on who they are. And one of the reasons for that is I find that leaders in my world, or just I see them, they continue to make bad decisions that aren't grounded in who they are because they don't know who they are. It's not salient when they're actually making the decision. They're trying to make the right decision from the data, right?
Yeah.
Stare at ChatGPT to tell you which thing to do instead of starting from mission, ethics, values, like you're making the decision. And so anyway, I think it'll be,
Yeah.
I've been evaluating the degree to which this process can really push that to be to commit me to do it, but also make it deeper than it would have been if I just chip away at it on my own.
Yeah.
That was a lot of stuff at once, but yeah. So I think I'm just sort of resonating along with the degree to which it fits, both in my schedule and for the project that I'm keep shaping.
One of the things that emerges for me in that, Bradley, too, is that as part of the agentic approach to this, we're going to encourage you to share resources with each other. Like I can send you all kinds of papers on narrative interview that does exactly what you're describing. And so part of building this little community up is that we discover that many of us are of an age where we've collected a lot of things. Some we still use, many we do not, but some, yes. And so that we can find ways to help each other. Yeah.
I like what you mentioned, Bradley, because it sounds like that you may be working towards almost like a tool or a framework that can help people go through some kind of assessment, perhaps, and identify something else. So this program invites you to really situate yourself where you currently are, and then by the end of the program, you might see, oh, my thinking about it has perhaps changed or expanded a little bit, or maybe I have a clearer focus now on what's for me next. And it would be great to see how the whole idea is taking more and more shape. Sounds
Yeah, I
like
think
a very exciting program.
Yeah, I think part of it is like I have a really aversion to making it efficient because I think that would destroy the
Fair enough.
point.
No.
Like, in many ways, I want to have these conversations. So it's like,
Yeah.
like I think it'd be interesting just to do them, and it would really, I think counterbalance everything that feels like it's happening, which is this push towards, I want it quicker. And I'm like, but you won't even do it. It's not the point.
Yeah.
Right. So, sit down and, if it doesn't take 3 hours, then you haven't done anything, kind of a thing. So Anyway, yeah, I think the project, the design studio could really help mature and flex out this thing that I've been wanting to do for a while, but I think the time is coming, fitting.
No.
Other thoughts?
Oh. I'd love to hear a little bit more about Martin's thinking or non-thinking about whether you have something or not. 'Cause I think what you mentioned with a kind of depleted area, I forgot the word. I think that can be a fantastic topic to explore.
Well, yeah, it has. If you've got somebody to talk to, part of the depletion is because they don't have people to talk to
Yeah.
about the things I want to talk.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm searching for something, but I don't yet have. I haven't yet made that tangible.
Yeah.
I remember from some previous Q&A conversations that someone was also saying they would like to do something, but they don't really know yet what that is. So instead of starting this journey in the design studio with something very specific, it is exactly that question. What's waiting for me next? And how can I have these conversations and hopefully get some clarity around it? But yeah.
I have a photographic project.
Ah,
Would fit quite well with this, but I'm not sure that's entirely appropriate.
that sounds
But it's important to you, and it
Yeah.
might be a good practice ground to kind of make this yours, and then you can apply it on the work front. Yeah. Anyways.
If I can add this, Martin, I recently came up with my a photo project myself because I became interested in the whole refugee situation in Germany. And as I thought about it more and more, I began to realize that this interest in this project had more to do with my own journey of returning back to Germany and my sense of home and belonging. So the photo project just became the vehicle for me to ask and
Yeah.
relate to something much more deeply that was very, very personal and intimate and still very fragile. I still feel very much a stranger in Germany, even though I've been here for almost 2 years now. But after 15 years abroad, it just everything has changed so much, including myself. So if a photo project is something that is something that you want to work on because you're deeply invested in it, then this is just the object through which you engage and discover.
Yeah.
So I'll work on it anyway.
Yeah.
The question is whether this is a tool which will
Yeah.
help me in the
Yeah.
right direction.
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
You know, I had that experience, Christopher, in going back to the States for the first time since I moved here on my own. And I was neither a resident nor a visitor.
Mm.
I clearly didn't belong there anymore, but I also wasn't just a random person from anywhere. I used to live there, but not in New York, but in the States. It felt like an alien place. Couldn't relate to it. Um, and yet it was theoretically home. So,
Mm.
and I feel, and to your point, what I'm taking from your story, Christopher, which I really appreciate, but by creating these sort of scaffolding for this process, I would like each of us to, because I'm bringing one of my own projects to the design studio myself. I'm not teaching you the material. I will make recordings and have all the content available, but part of it is I think we will be surprised. You will come in thinking the project is about one thing and will likely discover it was about something else the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that way, for you, Martin, or for any of us, it doesn't in some ways matter the scale or significance of the project, as long as it's meaningful and important in some way to you, not just abstract or trivial. It becomes a container for the journey of you trying to find yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in some ways, a photography project might even be better because you're not attached to outcomes or pleasing a client or trying to produce something. You're just doing this as a muse. So one of the things we came to, and in sort of organizing the language for this is we originally, Christopher, we talked about artist, more of artist language in the beginning. And then I had this idea of one of my favorite concepts ever is the muse. Yeah, because it's value neutral. It's often quite annoying, quite powerful. And so we wanted to sort of invite you to be a muse for yourself, but also to be a muse for others. Um, yeah. Um, yeah.
The other thing that I would chuck in the light of Christopher's comments is my recent trip to the UK. And David, I've already mentioned this,
Yes. Yeah.
in that I felt much more positive about being in the UK than I have at any time since we left 16 years ago,
Huh.
this time. And the change clearly isn't in the UK. I feel the change is in me.
Yeah.
And there are still things that are massively irritating, like spending 8.5 hours on the M5. But notwithstanding that, you know,
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
I think just picking up on this point Martin's made, I think that would be I'm in a similar, I can't remember the military expression, but I feel I'm in a similar place, that I don't have I think the project is me. I think that's
Yeah.
and it is around a lot of what sits at the feet of a lot of what you say and right, David, around, being a coach is such a point of ridicule at one level of this spectrum. Even I watched the latest Bridget Jones movie the other night with my younger son, and one of the key characters has gone from having a one-hit wonder at a Christmas song to 25 years later, he's now a life coach. Oh, isn't that funny? Ha ha ha, and it's like, well, and
Wow.
like my son's looking at me like, isn't that what you do? And I said, no, that's absolutely not what I do. But you find yourself in that, and at the other end, we sit in groups like this where it's an awful lot more. So, and I have fought the kind of this, which is what brought me to narrative coaching originally, this sort of counterintuitive, belief around what is and isn't coaching.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel I've reached that point. I think you described it in one of your papers, David, that kind of reaching that point of being an artisan where you want to do it your way.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of empowering madness that comes to that. You want to try some things that you think, well, actually, how bad could it be? So I think that would be my project, just to put it out there.
One of the themes, Sarah, at these conferences, particularly the first two, was quite blatant comments by a number of very experienced coaches that in their mind, coaching as they knew it is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Long live coaching, right? And there's for a whole host of reasons, and AI will put the final nail in the coffin. Anybody who pretends to hold on to coaching as we once knew it 25, 30 years ago. So I think there's part of the indirect mission for this program is we need income to varying degrees in our lives. We need purpose, community, meaning. And I think going back to one of the slides we used in the program, ID program now, we often were raised to be competent implementers of what we were taught to do. And that's not enough anymore at all. And so it requires a paradigm shift for many of us, and it's going to generate new post-coaching fields. And so I think there will be some process pieces that come out of this for all of us that we can learn from about how to do that, and how to describe that. And yeah.
I think it's worse than you've outlined, David, but perhaps I'm just less charitable.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to be
I mean, you start off as a baby coach with
yeah.
bright eyes and a bushy tail and all these ideas, and you learn this stuff.
Yeah.
And then there is no work
Yeah.
because all the work has been taken by the next more senior group.
Yeah.
And then the group beyond that are coach vampires and make their living by sucking the life out of the bottom layer.
You're even more cynical than I am, Martin.
I am, yes.
Right. Excellent. Well done.
This was a conversation we had yesterday.
Yeah.
And so that's a real problem because AI will take out what's left of the bottom layer.
Yes. They and the platforms will scoop up all of that and
Absolutely. Yeah.
so what like this one of my decisions on the plane on the way home last night and into this morning, I've been working on the next iteration of the five maturities report. And because I'm now working on these projects with EMCC, I'm now actually a master practitioner in EMCC. They granted it for my life's work and my contribution to coaching. But I said, I can't have integrity in helping these people work on these issues around accreditation if I have not subjected myself to that process. So I did that, and it's kind of fun. But I think there's a lot of opportunity, which is what I've been about the whole time. I never started from a traditional place in coaching. I never had to unlearn anything. I just built narrative coaching from the ground up. And I feel like we will gain, I think, a secondary level of resources and insights and languaging through watching each other's progress and projects. Um, because it will start to shape, and a lot of, I think what's coming is a need to formalize and develop cross-functional communities as to replicate what we're trying to do here. So you have ongoing conversation and dialogue and feedback to start inventing new ways of working. And so I think we will learn a lot from watching each other. Yeah.
And just to build on this, the last, at least for me, the last couple of weeks and months have been very interesting because David and I are IDing this program ourselves.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this, that we come from very different ways of thinking, and that often creates some tension. But what we were able to do is to use this tension to propel this program forward.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that because we roll it out in a couple of weeks, that it's going to stay. It's, my hope is that we all learn from this, that we all adapt and try to make it as dialogical as we can, and live ID by example, by always reiterating ourselves in the story and see what we learn from the field and what we
Yeah.
learn from you. And by that, it makes this, using the word integrative, this makes it really
Yeah.
integrative because we're
Yeah.
not just delivering the training, we're doing it ourselves. So I came up with a topic for myself, and I had also thought about a project, only to realize after investigating a little bit that it's becoming a very personal thing.
Mm.
What is it that I need to let go of in order to step more fully into my own
Mm.
sense of identity and work?
Yeah.
So I can focus on a project, that's fine, but underneath there's something more pertinent and very
Mm.
personal and very intimate. So it will be a challenge for me to see how that works in an environment such as this, to put it out there, even if I read my own prompts. But that's apparently where my work is. So whether I like it or not. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So just so we can get it on the video, I would like to show you the next two slides and the last two slides, kind of what happens through the various cycles. Um, and let me get back to sharing again. There we go. Okay. Um, so the orientation will largely be recorded for you. So as a way to get yourself grounded in the start of the program. And there'll be some little assignments you can do to kind of flesh out as much as you can about getting started as a place to begin. So there's a sort of a beginning of the journey for people that can be documented on through your sharing in the forum. And then we're thinking of these as sort of cycles through, even though we're going to focus on each cycle around one particular part of the flow. The rest is always available. So see things in context, and so see the bigger picture as it's unfolding. Um, yeah, and so we're doing these sort of in a couple of live sessions for each one, as well as the work on your own. The first one is really again about yourself and continuing to liberate the artist in you. Um, and then the second sort of round, the next month will be around deepening what you can see and sense. And so if you think about it literally from artists, many artists are quite mad in some ways, but you couldn't really teach people how to be Jackson Pollock. You could become Jackson Pollock, and then you might see the world the same way. But these first two cycles are really about you finding yourself. And what I'm imagining is going to happen is that many of you will understand what your project was about the whole time after the second cycle. Oh, that's why I'm doing this. Christopher was just bright enough. He figured his real purpose before he even began. Um, and then we're going to do some things around giving you some resources to begin to play with what you're working on in some new ways. Again, um, we want to be mindful of not putting too much content in there because it's not really that necessary, but there may be a frame or a resource that somebody will find helpful. The I-beam will be here because that's the one I use most often in structuring projects like this. But there are other pieces that will show up as well to kind of help you begin to work with what you're discovering in some new ways. Um, yeah. And then begin to think about the canvas itself, like what's showing up now, what's being revealed. We're going to do a lot more feedback, or what I think of as feed looping here. And we'll explain to you what that is in the middle of all this. But this is a way for you to start making more and more public of what am I discovering in it? What am I trying? And what am I noticing about the impact of doing that? And it's a way for us to begin to prepare for this idea of a showcase. Then the last one is kind of you reflecting, but also talking a lot about where you are and what you've learned as a way to anchor kind of the new credibility you have, the new confidence and clarity you have about what you're trying to do. And then we'll have sort of a last session, which will be both a showcase of kind of key learnings from you and key results, I suppose, with some reflections on what it's meant for you as a way for us to celebrate you. Yeah. Um, and because it's not a program, we'll be moving through these cycles, but you could spend 3/4 of the time in cycle 4, if that's where you are in your journey. There's no need to have to keep up with everything else if it doesn't serve you. Um, you might decide to spend the first half of the time just trying to figure out what cycle 1 means to you. And that's fine because that's where you are on the journey. All the rest will be available to you. And as we build this out for next year, there'll be even more resources. But our job of this is scaffolding for your journey. And we invite you to spend time where it's most valuable to you.
You can even go through all these processes just by exploring what it means for you to situate yourself more broadly or more
Yep.
deeply. So
Yep.
it's not that we encourage people to, by the end of it, have a product or something with an endpoint to it. It's really it can start and end wherever it's most useful for you.
Yeah. And this will fold into some form of membership for next year because we don't make the assumption that you can complete all this in any meaningful way in a few months. Maybe if you just, you get to a certain point and feel really confident in that. And then if doing this in a membership structure in some form, then you have a chance to kind of keep weaving this back in and out of what you're doing and get the resources you need and support you need to complete the project. But that may or may not happen when you finish in December. But it just depends on what you choose to focus on.
So based on that, David, are you proposing any aftercare?
Yeah, so particularly because we're doing this, let me just stop sharing. Because we're doing it this way for the first time, we'll probably have a couple of informal chats along the way, like what's happening, is this working? And we're going to as part of next year, create places for people that don't want to do the entire program or the experience again, but want to touch base. Um, and Christopher and I are still kind of working on what that looks like. I think it'll be a combination of like open forum and themes. Like you might say, one of them would be like, I feel like really good about this for myself, but my clients are not understanding yet. So what am I missing? So you might again come, and we want them to again feel just like you would uh, do if you were artists. And I used to do a lot of watercolor painting, and I remember I went to a class once, and I'd done it for quite some time. I wouldn't say I was an expert at all, but I was probably a high level intermediate. I went to this class with this woman who had never painted in her life, and her first paintings were better than mine. It was very annoying. And but the teacher was great because they helped you kind of destigmatize judging and comparing. And so, I had some moment of clarity and maturity where I had dialogue with this young woman, like, how did you come to see this? And that's what I realized as a narrative coaching, that wasn't that she was more skilled, but she could see the image in a different, same with photography. She saw what this wanted to be. And what I realized for myself, I was trying so hard to paint well, just like I say about coaches, stop coaching and just pay attention, right? That's part of where that came from, is my experience learning how to paint. I was trying too hard to paint well, as opposed to letting the picture make itself present, which she did so masterfully. Yeah. So we will do some things like that for you all in January, and then we'll see how the rest of it unfolds for ongoing support. Because we
And in
also would like to
addition, yeah,
have
go
you,
on,
sorry, Christopher.
go on.
We also would like you to, part of the value of building this in a community space is we would like you, for us to celebrate you. Like, I did this, and this is, so Margie, you might have, this is my photography exhibit. There might be a link to kind of a synopsis of that. Yeah.
And just to build on this, we are also exploring what else we can introduce to the program. May that be some other ID practitioners coming and showcasing their work and what they have experienced, applying this in either personal context or some professional context, and so that we can also, by extension, strengthen the community and strengthen exchange and collaboration. Hmm. Oh, you're on mute, David.
I know. Um, is there anything else that would be helpful to you right now?
I'm going to have to ask, how much are you, where are you pricing this offering? Let's put it that way.
For you, Martin, we have a special deal.
Okay, that's good to know.
Twice as much as everybody else. No, nothing. Yeah, we decided that, and the emergent nature of this, and this again is now built into the program. It's not an anomaly. That it's a little bit shorter than we'd first planned, so we decided to keep, and we wanted to give this opportunity to as many people as possible. So we priced it at $9.97 for you all, for the graduates, which you all are, and the graduates via the program. Even if you haven't done ID, it's fine. You'll recognize a lot of the pieces, and there'll be, like we're doing in narrative coaching now, there'll be recordings of all the core ID way material, either as a refresher or if that you want to go more into the roots of this, if that's useful to you. It's not necessary, but you might find it helpful. Yeah. And
So,
over time, we'll have, I think, much more robust offerings about winning work and those kind of more traditional things. Um, but yeah, but for me, it's like starting to connect people so they can help each other. Yeah.
So should you decide to register and want to make use of the special alumni rate, you would need to enter a code upon checkout. And I believe we had shared that code in some of the previous conversations, but I can put it up in the meantime, David, if you give me a second so that you
Yeah, just
have it
you put it in
already.
the chat box.
Yes, exactly. And that will lower the price point.
Sarah, Bradley, anything else that on your mind at the moment?
And not from me. That's been really
Okay.
helpful.
Thanks.
Well, that's complicated. Other than why does Krista have such complicated codes?
We won't make any
That's
culturally
maybe that's my design
stereotypical
studio.
comment.
Maybe that's my design studio project to think about that.
I probably need some pretty deep therapy for that, Christopher.
Alumni.
If you read it, it's not that difficult, actually.
No, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out.
Sure.
I think it's
Yeah,
the letters and numbers together, you know, that kind of.
Yeah,
In capitals as well.
yeah, with no spaces.
yeah.
It's like,
Otherwise, it's great.
Yeah, so we're still working behind the scenes to make this forum as rich and engaging as possible. We're also trying to make it a bit simpler than in the other spaces. So should you register in the next couple of days, you might notice perhaps some changes here and there. And if you see something that you would like to see in the forum or experience something that isn't working, please drop me a line so that we can make sure that it works well when we officially start on the 6th of August.
Okay. Well, thank you for spending our time, and I'm hoping you'll come and join us. And it's good to see you as always. And yeah, thanks, Christopher.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Take care. All right. Bye.
Hey, guys.